If you
No,
weren't,
not
then
too
we can
much.
wait.
I'll give you the history now.
Okay.
Ralph Waterman actually started teaching bird ID skills in an adult education program. I think it was in Arlington back in 1948.
Oh.
And he created the Dutchess County Bird Club in 1949 with his students. The bird records for the county go back a lot further. Like the first May census was conducted back in 1919 and has continued every year since then. The new Dutchess County Bird Club, as we know it today, was created in 1958, and it was renamed in 1959 after Ralph Waterman was killed in an auto accident. So that's our history. And
so what was Ralph Waterman like? Who was he? What did he?
He was an avid birder, and like I say, he created an adult education class, kind of like we have continuing education things now from DCC or something, on birds. And he had maybe 10 or 12 students, and they formed the first bird club. But the history of birding goes way back, Franklin Roosevelt participated in bird surveys back in the day, so like I say, since the early 1900s, we've had good ornithologists and birders in the area, so it's got a rich tradition in our county.
Excellent. So I would just ask everyone who is joining us now if you can mute yourself, just so that we can, aside from Susan, who is going to be speaking, if you can mute yourself so that we don't have any background sound, that would be really wonderful. And so I think we can get started. And so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Pam Kingsley. I'm the chair of the CAC, of the Conservation Advisory Commission for the town of Poughkeepsie. And we are actually hosting, I think, our first, shall we call it, presentation seminar, which we're really, really super excited to be doing. And we are doing it, our guest today is Susan Iannucci. She is a member of the Ralph T. Waterman Bird Club. She is the chair of their conservation committee. She is a member of their education committee. And I think, part of why today came about is, well, one, it's always interesting. I think, around our own yards, the idea of drawing wildlife to it, of creating a beautiful space around the homes that we live in, and providing and making it beautiful, but at the same time providing housing and food for wildlife is something that's really wonderful. And I think in these times of COVID, it's become even more part of our lives, because so many more of us are at home, so much more. And I think maybe so much more alert to what's going on outside of our houses. I know that I'm constantly looking, I'm seeing birds that I feel like I haven't seen before. And my husband and I he was washing dishes, and I was looking out the back window, and I was like, I've never seen cardinals down on the ground before around our house. It's like, I don't know, that's like crazy. And then there's goldfinches, and it just seems like the population, it seems to be increasing, or maybe it's simply they're coming out of their hiding spaces because we're not so active. The human population is not so active. So anyway, we're delighted to host this presentation. And just some specifics. So there will be a Q&A portion at the end of Susan's presentation. So if you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat, okay, and we will track those, and we promise that we will ask all those questions. And also, Susan, I don't know if you've done it already, and if she hasn't, she will by the time this ends. She is going to put her email address in the chat. So if you have further questions, she will be delighted to answer those and also connect you up. And we invite you also to visit the Ralph T. Waterman Bird Club website, which I think also Susan will put the URL up for that in the chat. So that all said, Susan, take it away.
All right. Hello. I'm excited to be here because, believe it or not, this is my first education event of the year. So I want to thank the Conservation Action Committee for inviting me and handling all the technology. So pre-pandemic, you may have seen the Bird Club at local events where we have a local bird display, or maybe you have attended one of our weekly walks, which are on hold right now, except we're just starting them up again for members of the club. They aren't open to the public right now. We also have monthly programs, which we're looking to move online until we can get together again. And we collect a lot of bird records for the county, including a Christmas bird count, the May census, waterfowl counts, regular eBird submissions, and a breeding bird atlas. We also have a rare bird alert system to notify our members of unusual sightings in the area in real time, and a bi-monthly newsletter, as well as a handy pocket county reference guide. So if you're interested in joining us, you could check out our website at watermanbirdclub.org. All right, so tonight I want to talk about gardening for wildlife with an emphasis on birds. Can everybody see the presentation all right now?
Yes, it's looking good.
Okay, so before we talk about how to help birds, though, I want to take a couple minutes and think about why we should help birds. So unlike the Flintstones, we no longer need a pelican to do our laundry or a pterodactyl to fly us across the country. However, we still need birds, and unfortunately, they need us now. They were doing just fine without us. They survived an asteroid strike, multiple ice ages, and natural disasters. But in the short time since humans appeared on the scene, the planet has changed drastically. And in just the past 50 years, we have lost nearly 3 billion with a B birds. So humans are entirely responsible for the habitat loss, the pesticides, pollution, and climate changes that are causing this decline. So it's time for us to adjust our behavior in order to help birds survive. They play an essential role in the functioning of all the world's ecosystems, and they have a direct impact on our health, economy, and food production. So let's look at why we need birds. There's lots of reasons. Birds control pests. Ducks, for example, eat truckloads of mosquitoes. If you're a coffee drinker, then you depend on the warblers to eat coffee bearer borers. Bluebirds are being used to control pests at organic wineries. Birds pollinate plants, mainly hummingbirds is the only pollinators we have in this country. Birds are nature's cleanup crew. Vultures do an excellent job of cleaning up roadkill and preventing spread of disease through dead animals. And then there's seed dispersal. Birds eat seeds and poop them out elsewhere. And studies have shown that the seeds that pass through a bird actually have a higher germination rate than those that don't. As far as transforming landscapes, if you've ever seen the rocks near a seabird colony that look totally white, that guano provides essential nutrients for the marine ecosystems around those rocks. And birds like the shorebirds eat snails that prevent our marshes from becoming barren mudflats. Birds also provide environmental monitoring. You may remember canaries in the coal mine back in the day when the miners would take a canary down to detect toxic gases before they affected the miners. Today they're using loons to monitor the amount of mercury coming from coal burning plants in the Adirondacks. Locally, they're using tree swallows to monitor the level of PCBs in the Hudson River. If you're wondering, the answer was yes, the PCBs are making their way up the food chain. So in general, if the environment is good for birds, then it's good for us. And lastly, birds inspire us. They're just beautiful. So as the old expression goes, money talks. And recently there's been an effort to attach a dollar amount to the ecosystem services provided by birds in order to quantify the value of conservation efforts. And the research shows that most environmental conservation really does pay off directly. So that's good news for conservation organizations, but how can we as individuals help birds? Well, we can create bird-friendly spaces. So one of the main threats facing birds today is habitat loss. People are not going away anytime soon, at least I don't think so. So we need to find ways to coexist with our feathered friends. Today's focus will be on what we can do to make our living spaces more friendly for birds, and along the way, learn about some of the birds we are likely to see if we're successful. So what do birds need? Well, birds and other wildlife need the same things we do: food, water, shelter, including cover to hide from weather and predators, and places to raise their young. And there's one more item to add to the list in order to better serve wildlife, and that's sustainable practices. So some of you might recognize this list. It comes from the National Wildlife Federation's Garden for Wildlife program. It's their garden certification checklist. I don't expect you to be able to read this. This is just a screen capture of their website. If you're interested, you can download this detailed checklist from their website and complete an online form to get your yard certified. And then you can put up one of those signs that says Certified Wildlife Habitat. I just found it was a good starting point for thinking about what you want to do with your space, whether it's a yard, an empty corner lot, a community park, or just a deck or patio. So let's look more in detail at what birds need. Food. If you provide it, they will come. One of the easiest things you can do to attract birds to your yard is put up a bird feeder. Fill it with some black oil sunflower seeds, and maybe you'll see a northern cardinal in your yard. That's a female on the left, more brown, and the male on the right. Finches are also seed eaters. The books will tell you that goldfinches are attracted to Niger seed or thistle seed, but I have found that they are quite happy eating black oiled sunflower seeds, and they happen to cost less too. I wouldn't recommend the seed mixes because the birds will pick through it for their favorites and throw the rest on the ground. So if you want to try different kinds of seeds, put them in separate feeders. I also like this cage style feeder shown on the right over the tube feeders with the individual perches, just because it accommodates more birds at one time. And it's also easier for birds like woodpeckers to use. House finches are another common feeder bird. As you'll see with many bird species, the male is often the more colorful one. So that's the male on the left and the female on the right. Another seed eater is the tufted titmouse. And the inset shows another style of feeder called a hopper style feeder. And a few more sunflower seed eaters, the mourning dove, blue jays, black-capped chickadees, and even little chipping sparrows. In the springtime, maybe you'll get a rose-breasted grosbeak visiting your feeder. You could tell these birds are seed eaters. Just look at that big schnoz designed for cracking open seed shells. The birds like the chickadees and the titmice need to carry their seed to a branch and hold it between their toes and peck it open, whereas the cardinals, grosbeaks, and finches just crack it with their beak and slurp up the seed with their tongue. The grosbeaks are sitting, that's a male and a female, by the way. The male is the black one with the pretty red breast. And they're sitting on a tray feeder. This is probably my favorite feeder, just because it accommodates a lot of birds at once, and I can see the birds. If I get the hopper style feeder, they invariably eat off of the side that faces away from my window. So with the tray, I can see who's in there. Whatever type of feeder you put up, though, you're going to want to make sure it's not too close to any trees or tall shrubs. And you might want to get one of these domes to put over it. The dome helps keep the seeds dry during wet weather, and it prevents this from happening. That's before I got the hood. On the ground underneath your feeder, you might find sparrows like this white-throated sparrow on the left or a dark-eyed junco on the right. These are winter residents in our area. And when the weather turns cold, you could add a block of suet to your feeding station and you'll attract woodpeckers like this downy woodpecker, or a red-bellied woodpecker on the left, or a white-breasted nuthatch on the right. The woodpeckers and nuthatches also eat the sunflower seeds, but they are particularly fond of suet. And here's a northern flicker trying to get the last of the suet. And if you really want to get fancy, add some mealworms to your tray and the bluebirds will come. Bluebirds also eat suet and berries in the winter, but they are not seed eaters. Some other birds that hang around the feeders and like mealworms are Carolina wrens. They also eat crushed peanuts and suet and an occasional sunflower seed. And if you want to help out our smallest feathered friends, the ruby-throated hummingbird, especially in early spring and fall when there's not as many flowers in bloom, you could provide a sugar water feeder, which is just 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. You do not need red food coloring. They often make the feeders red to attract hummingbirds because it turns out hummingbirds have learned that red flowers typically have more nectar than the other flowers just because bees cannot see red and they tend not to visit them as often. There's another kind of hummingbird feeder which I haven't shown. It's a large container meant to hold bananas, which are supposed to generate fruit flies, providing protein for the birds. But I also found it attracted raccoons, which were very adept at pulling it apart for the bananas. So I've moved away from that. And once you start attracting small birds to your feeders, you're also going to attract larger birds who are interested in eating the smaller birds. So this is a juvenile Cooper's hawk looking for sparrows in the garden. And you'll also attract other animals like chipmunks and red squirrels, who in turn attract other birds of prey. For example, this red-shouldered hawk. This is an interesting hawk because it does not eat birds, it eats just about everything else. And the birds seem to know this because when he's in the neighborhood, the other birds continue eating at the feeder like nothing's wrong. But if the Cooper's hawk is anywhere near, you can't find another bird in the neighborhood. So we've looked at a variety of birds that will eat what we feed them, and there are more, but this only adds up to maybe dozens of bird species. So there's roughly 250 species of birds that we can see just in Dutchess County throughout the year. So what do all the rest of them eat? Or for that matter, what do our feeder birds eat when we're not feeding them? And the answer to that is insects. Sure, some waterfowl and wading birds eat fish, amphibians, and invertebrates, but a whopping 96% of North American land birds depend on insects and spiders for themselves, and especially for feeding their chicks. So this brings us to the gardening part of the talk. But first, we need to review a little science and make sure we understand food chains. So here is Sue's food chain simplified. Plants are the first level of the food chain in any ecosystem. They're the only organism capable of capturing the sun's energy and transforming it into food for the rest of us. So the leaves are the solar panels, and they absorb the solar energy and convert it into chemical energy. The next level comprises all the animals that eat plants. So familiar herbivores like rabbits and deer play a rather small role when it comes to transferring energy from plants to the predators and other levels of the food web. It's the insect herbivores who convert plant tissue into insect tissue and then excel at providing food in the form of themselves for other species. So the plant is eaten by the caterpillars and insects, the stored energy is transferred to the bugs, the birds eat the bugs, and the energy is transferred to the bird. So getting back to the birds and their food requirements, insects are essential. Baby birds need insects for protein. Chickadee parents need to find between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks that hatch, just to raise one brood to maturity. That's a lot of bugs. So multiply that by all the other birds raising chicks, and we're talking literally tons of bugs. This is not a chickadee you're looking at. It's a blue jay with some sort of winged insect. A chickadee is a cavity nester, so I wasn't able to find a picture of chickadee chicks. All right, so how are you as a gardener going to help birds find insects? Plant native plants. If you only take away one thing from this evening's talk, let it be this: the importance of native plants cannot be overemphasized. To understand why, we need to go into a little bit of science again. Why native plants? Most insects are specialists that only eat vegetation from plants they share an evolutionary history with. So to exploit their host plants effectively, insects have evolved the ability to find the host, synchronize their life cycle with the host, and adapt to the leaf chemistry of the host. When faced with a non-native ornamental plant, the insects either do not recognize the plant as a food source, or they find the leaf chemistry of the plant to be toxic to them. So by planting non-native, pest-free ornamentals, we are starving the insects and subsequently the birds that depend on them. Alien ornamentals often introduce harmful diseases and insects that evolved on other continents. So when they come here, the foreigners have no predators and they are able to outcompete the natives. This is partly how they become invasive. A classic example is chestnut blight, which came over from Asia. The American chestnut tree used to be the primary nut producer in eastern forests, way more than oak, hickory, and beech contribute today. And those chestnut trees hosted insects that supported huge populations of songbirds. But within 50 years of the chestnut blight coming to America, the dominant upland forest tree from Maine to Mississippi that had an 87 million year evolutionary history, including an asteroid impact and 20 glaciations, was essentially eliminated from the eastern forests. So by choosing native plants, we're gardening for insect biodiversity. Insects have a bad rap due to a few biting, stinging, disease-carrying, or crop-devouring types. But of the 4 million or so insect species, and for comparison, there's only 10,000 species of birds, only 1% of those insects have a negative impact on humans. The other 99% pollinate plants, keep populations of other insects in check, aerate and enrich the soil, and provide food either directly or indirectly for most other animals. Non-native species are like ticking time bombs, taking up space and crowding out the native species, directly killing them in some cases. So a more modern example, which is unfolding in New York right now, is the destruction of our ash trees due to the emerald ash borer. You can see evidence of this in the tree on the left, where the bark is bleaching to that pale salmon pink color. And the photo on the right shows an oriental bittersweet that's literally choking this tree to death. So if we want to plant for insect diversity, what should we plant? There's an excellent book on this subject by Doug Tallamy called Bringing Nature Home, if you want to dive deeper into the relationships between insects and plants. And it also contains lists of native plants with their wildlife value and desirable landscaping traits organized by the region of the country. By the way, his newest book is called Nature's Best Hope, and I'm in the middle of reading that, and that is excellent too. So looking at the examples above, we can see that all native plants are not equal when it comes to hosting insects. So the numbers in the chart show the number of butterfly and moth species supported by each type of plant. So for example, I don't know if you can see these well or not, the oak tree can support 534 different types of caterpillars. Wild cherries and plums and willows, 450 some. Maple trees are kind of in the middle at 285 species. And at the bottom, we have a tulip tree, which can host 28 different species of butterflies or moths. So when you're choosing what to plant in your yard, you want to take biodiversity into consideration. You know, why plant a tulip tree, which very few insects have the ability to eat, when you could plant an oak, a willow, or a cherry, which can host hundreds of caterpillar species? And I guess if you can only plant one tree in your yard, the lesson here is make it an oak. National Audubon also has a website to help you find native plants to attract different kinds of birds to your yard. You enter your zip code and it comes back with lists of native plants that grow best in your area, along with a list of birds that are attracted to each type of plant. And this is just a screen capture of the first page of the website also. You can go play with it. It has different filters, so you can search by the type of plant, whether you want a shrub or a tree or grasses, and you can search by the plant resource if you're looking for fruit or nectar or to attract butterflies. And you can even search by the type of bird you want to attract to your yard. So getting back to bird food, if you plant it, they will come. Once you get some native plants established in your garden, along with the insects they host, there's a potential to see many more kinds of birds, like this Baltimore oriole. In the spring, I found these birds will come to a feeder if it contains fresh oranges. I've also heard grape jelly works, but that sounds kind of messy to me. There's speculation that they obtained their sweet tooth from wintering in the tropics where they eat a lot of fruit. And if you want to know, if you're curious about how an oriole eats an orange, it's called gaping. They plunge their beak into the fruit and open it up and make a swath of juice, which they lap up with their tongue. Okay, so other insect eaters, this is a blue-gray gnatcatcher sitting in an almost dead cherry tree. Here's a great crested flycatcher. And then there's the warblers. This is a male yellow warbler. Here's a black-throated green warbler finding insects in the apple tree blossoms up at Peach Hill Park in Poughkeepsie. Here's a few more warblers, a blue-winged warbler, a black and white warbler, a palm warbler, and a yellow-rumped warbler in fall plumage down in the lower right corner. Look, note the leaves behind the yellow-rumped warbler. See all those holes? That's a beautiful plant, which is part of a healthy ecosystem. It's playing host to some sort of caterpillars who in turn are providing food for the birds. So we could go on and on with warblers, but there are other beautiful birds too, like cedar waxwings. Now, some of you gardeners might say, hey, that cedar waxwing is eating an invasive autumn oliveberry or something. There are many invasive alien plants which produce lots of edible berries for birds. But part of the reason they're so invasive is because the birds eat them and poop the seeds everywhere. But the problem is that these berries only support the birds after they reproduce each season. They don't provide anything for the nestlings. So if having aliens means there are fewer insects available during the nesting season, then it doesn't matter how many berries are available afterwards, there won't be a new crop of birds to eat them. So it's better to provide berries and bugs by planting a viburnum or a winterberry or a red cedar. Here's a few more examples of our insect eaters. Tree swallows are mostly seen in open tree-less areas, but they got their name from nesting in tree cavities. Today, they've taken quite nicely to nest boxes, which we'll discuss more in a little bit. The upper right shows a ruby-crowned kinglet foraging for insects in an American cranberry bush. On the lower left, we have an eastern towhee, who's a large member of the sparrow family, though he's more colorful than many sparrows. They like to kick up the leaves in the underbrush, foraging for bugs. And the lower right corner shows a Swainson's thrush who's eating berries from a native dogwood tree. So we've talked a lot about food. Let's move on to some of the other things birds need, basically water, cover, and places to raise their young. So if you're not fortunate enough to have a lake, a stream, or a pond on your property, then you'll need to provide water in the form of bird baths or fountains or even dog bowls. This is a baby eastern bluebird checking out a typical ceramic bird bath. And probably the most popular source of water in my backyard is these clay pot saucers. I put them in various places in the garden and on the deck, and they get a lot of use. Birds, chipmunks, and squirrels drink from them. The raccoons sometimes wash their food in them and leave them full of mud in the morning. And the birds like to splash in them. So one of my favorite signs of spring is when the catbird returns to my yard. That's who you see here. They absolutely love the swimming pool. And I don't even know how these birds raise chicks, because to me it looks like they're in the swimming pool all day long. Water is just as important for birds in winter, though you'll have to swap out the clay saucers for silicone or metal bowls, which won't crack when the water freezes at night. Another option is to get one of these heated bird baths. You can plug it into a temperature sensor so that it only heats the water when the temperature drops below freezing. So this shows a small flock of robins that came to drink on a wintry January day. There is a danger of birds bathing when the weather's extremely cold. I saw this once when a starling attempted to bathe in the heated bath on a sunny day, but the temps were only in the teens. The water froze on his feathers and he couldn't shake the ice off, so he'd return to the bath to melt the ice, but when he got out, it instantly froze again. So I suspect that that bird did not survive the night. Since that time, I've read in Birdwatcher's Digest magazine that they suggest you put rocks in the heated bird bath so that there's no room for bathing, but there's plenty of places to drink from. Here's a few more images of birds enjoying the water. There's a mourning dove at the top left, an indigo bunting at the upper right, a chickadee in the winter on the lower left, and this fledgling Cooper's hawk did not know what to make of the bird bath. I think it was curious after watching the other birds splash in it, but after trying it, he decided it was no big deal. Eventually, the young hawk did figure out how to take a drink, but that was the first and the last time I ever saw a raptor in a water dish. So, let's move on to shelter. Birds need cover as shelter from weather and predators. So here is one of the bird favorite bushes in my backyard. It's an American cranberry. And you can see that even when most of the leaves have fallen, there's still a dense tangle of small branches and twigs, which provide excellent cover. So the chickadees and the titmice take their seeds from the nearby feeder into this bush to peck open the shells. And if an alarm call goes up, the sparrows and finches all dive into here. I could be looking at this bush with my binoculars and only see a handful of birds, but then something startles them into flying, and I'm always amazed at how many come out of the bush, sometimes more than 20. Here's another form of cover for birds, a brush pile. Pardon the bad pun here, but this makes yard cleanup a breeze after a windstorm. Just pile the down branches here and save yourself a trip to the dump. I also dump my tray feeder here when I want to clean it out, and the sparrows can peck through looking for unopened seeds. It's also a good place to dump the sunflower shells because there's a toxin in the shells that seems to inhibit the growth of other plants if you've had your feeder in the same location for a while. The other solution to that problem is to buy sunflower hearts, and I'm still kind of researching the economy of this option. A sunflower seed is roughly 40% hull, so your 50-pound bag of seed is the equivalent of a 30-pound bag of hearts. This is a smaller brush pile that started as a firewood pile, but morphed when I no longer had a fire pit and the wood began to rot. So somewhere in there, there's a white-throated sparrow. He blends in nicely though. All right, birds also need safe nesting places to raise their young. So these crows are saying, forget this do-it-yourself stuff. Next time we're using a contractor, as he looks at the birds in the nice little birdhouse. This isn't totally accurate because, as we'll see, different kinds of birds build different kinds of nests. Some birds are cavity nesters. So primary cavity nesters like woodpeckers or chickadees excavate their own holes. And one way we can help these birds is to leave dead snags on your property. If you need to remove a tree for safety reasons, consider taking the top off, but leaving a good bit of the trunk for the birds. As it decays, it will provide both food and shelter. And then there's the secondary cavity nesters like the bluebirds or swallows or wrens who use the holes left over from the primary cavity nesters. Here's another cavity nester, the eastern screech owl. They're in a cavity in a large tree, maybe 15 to 20 feet off the ground. And you'll see there's a red morph and a gray morph, but they don't seem to mind what color feathers they have. They're hanging out together. As more and more land gets developed, though, there's fewer trees with suitable nesting cavities available. So we can help some of these birds, mainly the secondary cavity nesters, by providing nest boxes. Bluebird trails of nest boxes installed by the club are routinely cleaned and monitored. This shows a typical bluebird box. Note that there's always a baffle on the bottom to prevent predators from climbing up the pole and entering. And often you'll see two boxes side by side in the open field. It turns out that tree swallows like these nest boxes too. So by placing two boxes together, a tree swallow will inhabit one and a bluebird is free to inhabit the other. The birds would not tolerate another pair of the same species in such close proximity, but they don't seem to mind the other species occupying the neighboring box, and they help each other defend against intruders. So bluebird monitors count eggs and hatchlings and note when the birds fledge. And then they clean the boxes so they're available for another brood. The bluebirds are a successful conservation story from our local club. You know, we've fledged many more birds than when they started this project back in the early 60s. The Bluebird chairperson has asked me to talk a little bit about the destructive nature of house sparrows, which are an invasive species in America, and how given the opportunity, they will take over the nest box and kill the native birds. So she would urge you, if you're going to put up a nest box, to monitor the box and eliminate the house sparrows if they're present. Birds who are not cavity nesters build nests of various shapes and sizes, typically hidden in the foliage where it's difficult to see them. They'll use grass, leaves, twigs, mud, or whatever they can find. It looks like this blue jay has incorporated some plastic cable ties in its nest. And this is where the native plants come in again, providing appropriate nesting sites along with a food source for the chicks. So this blue jay, is nesting in a viburnum bush. And here's a gray catbird who's hidden in a non-native forsythia bush on the side of the house, but I think the lure of the swimming pools and the native plants in the backyard made it acceptable to nest in this insect-barren bush. I think it was a new parent though, because they had not returned to that bush again. Ruby-throated hummingbirds make their nests out of lichen and spider webs. The female does all the work of building the nest, sitting on the eggs, and feeding the chicks. So she would probably welcome an easy meal at a sugar water feeder during this time. Robins are meticulous nest builders. First they make a side wall with straw, and then they line the bottom and sides with mud. And that nice circle is created as she moves around and around to make a flat bottom. And then another layer of straw is put down. At the other end of the building spectrum are the pigeons and mourning doves, who are not the best architects. They make a flimsy platform of twigs, often on a man-made structure such as a gutter or a ledge, or in this case, the pigeons are under the eaves of the abandoned hat factory down by Madame Brett Park in Beacon. A Baltimore oriole nest is a work of art. They weave this round basket of grasses hanging from a tree branch. And I saw this one being built on the Dutchess County Rail Trail up by the marsh just north of Route 55. I would love to see how they actually start, how they make that first piece of grass hold, but I haven't seen that yet. Cliff swallows and barn swallows build their nests out of mud. So the cliff swallows on the left have built their nests under the eaves of a horse barn in the northern part of the county. And the barn swallows are nesting under a bridge over Wappingers Creek down by New Hamburg train station. Bigger birds need bigger nests. So this red-tailed hawk family refurbished a former great blue heron's nest down on Wappingers Creek. And interestingly enough, I noticed that the other heron nests were still occupied by herons at the same time that this hawk family was living there. So they must have reached some sort of an agreement. Fall is a good time to look for bird nests. They're quite visible once all the leaves are gone. Unfortunately, the birds are gone too. But if you note where the nests are, chances are come spring, a bird will be building in the near vicinity again. Fall is also the time of year when I would encourage you to take the Lazy Gardeners Pledge. This is a campaign launched by Habitat Network, which is a citizen science project of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, encouraging messy gardening. So messy gardening is a conservation project that benefits birds, pollinators, and other wildlife while asking you to do absolutely nothing. That's right, nothing. So by leaving your leaves on the ground, the dead flowers and weeds standing, and letting the grass grow tall and go to seed, you can provide valuable nourishment to migrating and overwintering birds, nesting habitat for native bees and other pollinators, and a welcoming environment for all sorts of wildlife, right up the food chain. So we'll go through these messy gardening tips. Most of them are just a review of what we just covered, but the last one is important. We want to leave fallen leaves on the property. Allow dried flower heads to stay standing in the garden. The birds will eat these all winter long. Let the grass grow tall and go to seed. Build a brush pile instead of removing fallen branches from the property. Leave your snags on the property. Don't use chemicals, pesticides, or fertilizers. And here's the important thing. Delay your garden cleanup until spring after we've had several consecutive 50+ degree days. This allows the overwintering pollinators to wake up for spring and move on. So messy gardening kind of leads us into the last topic I wanted to cover today, which is sustainable practices. So providing food, water, cover, and nest sites will create a wildlife-friendly garden, but how you manage your garden is important too. You want to maintain your landscape in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way to ensure that the water, soil, and air stay clean and healthy. So sustainable practices involve soil and water conservation. Try to limit your water use, use drip or soaker hoses. You could collect rainwater or make a rain garden. We want to reduce erosion and use mulch. Controlling exotic species, well, we know we want to use native plants, but we also want to remove the non-native plants. And if you can, it would be good to reduce your lawn areas. A well-manicured lawn is a virtual desert for most birds, unless you're a robin looking for worms. And practice integrated pest management. And by that, we mean prevention as opposed to eradication. So please don't use rodenticides, which are harmful to non-targeted species. You put the bait box out and the mouse eats the poison, but he doesn't die there. He goes out and something else eats the mouse. and that gets poisoned, and then the vulture cleans up that, and the vulture gets poisoned, and it works its way right up the food chain. So instead, seal the cracks in your foundation, remove climbing hedges from buildings, maintain your landscaping 2 feet away from structures, and encourage owls. You know, one owl will eat 3 or 4 mice per day, so he could take care of 1,000 mice per year. And you can let the insects from the native plants control the other insect pests. And finally, the organic practices. You know, we want to eliminate chemical pesticides and fertilizers, compost, and avoid plants grown with neonicotinoids. This is another chemical that makes plants resistant so they don't die from, I think, the chemical Roundup or whatever, but in the meantime, it's a neurotoxin for a bird. If a bird eats just one seed coated with that, it can become disoriented and not know which way to migrate. So, with over 95% of the lower 48 states land developed already, it is up to all of us to make a difference in the management of our nation's wildlife. Humans have changed the landscape drastically and rapidly on an evolutionary timescale, leaving the plants and animals no time to adapt to these sudden changes. So without our intervention now, many of them will not survive. Our gardens need native plants to support a diverse and balanced food web essential to any sustainable ecosystem. So support biodiversity, go native. And I wanted to finish up with a video created by a friend of mine in the bird club, Manjul Bhushan. She doesn't put up bird feeders, but every year she enjoys watching a variety of birds and other critters come to feast on the berries of her native dogwood trees. And I just thought this was an excellent demonstration of the biodiversity that comes with native plants. So enjoy.
Well, Susan, this was like a really absolutely wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I would just encourage, if anybody wants to ask questions, again, you know, if you want to put them in the chat section, Susan will be open to answering them. And I just know like a couple, I mean, one, because I have, you know, hummingbirds that come by the front of the house sometimes. And the idea that their nests are made of lichen and spider webs, just like, I think is the most amazing, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I think just a hummingbird nest that have like spider webs in them, I think is fantastic. And then also, I was looking at the heron's nest that you were showing that a hawk had taken. So herons nest up in trees? Because I always thought like those and egrets would be down by the water.
Well, they eat down by the water. They're a wading bird, and they catch fish and frogs and things like that. But if you go down to Wappingers Creek, like down along Creek Road there, or there's heron rookeries in several parts of the county, but you'll see they tend to build their nests together. There'll be multiple nests.
But they're up in the trees.
They're up high in the trees, the top of a sycamore tree, the top of evergreen trees.
I mean, because I live right around the corner from there, and there have been times when I have driven down Creek Road and I have counted like 15 egrets, or
on that little island.
And I've never thought to look up.
Right, look at the little island that's across the creek, just south of the boat launch in Wappingers. And that's where it is.
All right, awesome. I will absolutely do that, because I walk up to Carnwath and we've got the eagle's nest that is up on Old Troy Road.
Right.
Thankfully that got rebuilt after that huge storm that knocked the entire thing down 2 years ago.
I think they're building again though.
It's huge. They totally have rebuilt it. It's back and big. But the other thing I'd like you to define what a snag is.
A snag is a dead tree. You know, so So if the tree is dead, you know, people are worried it's going to fall on their house. So yes, you need to take it down so it's not a danger to your home. But if it's possible, you know, leave as much of it up as you can, because that provides habitat and food for the birds.
Okay, great. And actually, I'm looking at the chat section, and so I'd ask Susan and David to unmute themselves because they have a hummingbird question.
Hi,
All right.
hi everybody, thanks. I just want to say, as a member of the CAC, I'm thrilled to see all the people that are here. I listen to, sometimes to, there's a bird show on WAMC, and I was really fascinated the other day to hear them talking about the hummingbirds and recommending that we leave the feeders out much longer into the cold weather than I had thought. And they
Yes.
explain, this is more just to share than a question, even into like Thanksgiving. They explained that, and I thought this was incredible. They explained that the birds are genetically programmed when they migrate to follow the same route that their ancestors followed, even if it is not a direct route. And that some of the hummingbirds come from even Montana, Alaska, but instead of going straight south, and, you know, as the crow flies, as it were, they will first go east and then south because that's what their ancestors did. And they are possibly going to use your feeder as a stopover to refuel very late into the year. So I think this year we're going to leave our sugar water feeders up, you know, much longer than we typically do. And I just wondered if you had experience with sighting them at that late in the year, because we've never left them that long.
Oh, yes. You know, people worry that, oh, you know, the birds will become dependent on us feeding them, but birds don't need us to feed them. So, but by feeding them, you know, you're not harming the birds here, but you might be helping a bird who's struggling to finish that late migration. Maybe he got blown off course by a storm or whatever. And, you know, you can go into eBird and search for sightings of hummingbirds and see the latest dates they've been found. But I know of cases where people have seen them even in November, and sometimes they're a different kind of hummingbird, a rufous hummingbird. The only hummingbird that breeds in our county is the ruby-throated hummingbird.
Well, that is wonderful. And actually, okay. So do you want to, one more time, Susan, do you want to indicate what the website is for the Ralph T. Waterman Bird Club?
Yeah. Can I do that without interrupting the video?
Or if you want to put it in the chat.
Well, I'm trying to get to the chat without
You should
upending
be
the
able
video.
to, down below, you should be able to do that.
Well, I think my problem is that the keynote went full
Oh, that's
screen and I
okay.
lost my Zoom
But I
control.
think if anybody Googles Ralph T. Waterman Bird Club, you will land on the
Okay,
website.
I can tell you what it is, and as soon as this is over, I'm going to put up a resources page that is all the sites that I use to research this program, and it has those websites on it. Maybe they could just take a screen capture, and then they'd have all of them, the Audubon and the...
Somebody just put it in the chat as well.
Oh, Adrian's
Right.
got it there.
It's just watermanbirdclub.org.
Yeah, Adrian's got that up. So thank you very much for that.
And we wanted to mention about the pathway.
Oh, yes,
Yes,
Susan,
if I may,
yes,
okay.
absolutely, go for it.
So I'm not only a member of the CAC here with Pam presenting this tonight, I'm also the chair of the town's Climate Smart Task Force. And we're very excited, sort of the two groups, to be entering into a project. The town is going to be joining an organization called the Pollinator Pathway. It's actually locally the Northeast Pollinator Pathway. I don't know, Susan Iannucci, if you're familiar with it. This is an organization that literally works on creating appropriate pathways for all of our pollinators that are so stressed right now. And you actually create a map, like a target map of the pathway you want to create. and you have your, you know, your existing sort of open and green spaces in your, in this case, in our town, and then we would be offering to residents to be on the pathway, and that would mean doing certain practices, many of these same types of practices that we have discussed tonight, at your home or even at your business. You know, it could be something in a planter, it could be anything, so that we would work on creating this pathway, and we will have the little signs that you can put on your yard that, you know, this home is on the pollinator pathway. And it's a great way to help the environment right at your own home, and we hope that it'll be a wonderful sort of way for our committees to engage town residents. And we are looking for organizations that are interested in helping to steer this project, and Susan, I will be in touch with you about that, because I feel like the Bird Club is a natural
Right.
partner.
Yes.
But any other organizations, I have a list of a lot of interest. You know, we have the Vassar Environmental Cooperative is going to work with us, other places, the Peach Hill people, but also individuals. If there's anyone here who has a real interest in this kind of thing, who would like to participate in a steering committee for this project, we would love to hear from you. The CAC and the Climate Smart Task Force both have pages on the town website, and it's very easy to go there and to find our email addresses that we monitor. So would love to hear from anyone. And just to also say that we at the CAC could really use some more members on our group to do more projects like this. So if anyone's interested after tonight, you know more about us, please reach out to us. Thank you very much for the time.
Absolutely. So, and I see here that now Susan has finished with her resources page. So if you guys want to take a screenshot of that, or again, do we have any additional?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, also, if you think of a question later that you didn't get in tonight, you could email it to me and I'll get back to you, on the Waterman Bird Club site. My email is conservation1@watermanbirdclub.org. So
Wonderful. That would be great. And also, if you want, again, if you want to go to the town of Poughkeepsie website, the CAC, we have our own page, and there's an address there. If you want to email us there for further information, that would be wonderful. And if you're interested also in joining the CAC, we absolutely would welcome more members. That would be fantastic. And if I'm looking at the chat, I don't think
okay, I'm in
we have
the
any
chat
additional
now.
questions. Is there anything, Susan, in wrapping up that you would like to say?
Nope, I thank you for having me, and really the native plant thing is more important than I can say. You know, you're talking about the pollinator pathways, and in the Doug Tallamy's newest book, I was just reading about what fussy eaters most insects are, and one of the examples is the monarch butterfly. You know, they're so specialized that they can only eat the milkweed plants, and they're not going to evolve before they die off to eat anything else. So that's just a fascinating example. And just, you know, planting one plant is helping one insect. And unfortunately, I think like 90% of insects are specialists like that can only eat certain native plants. So it's really important that we don't lose our native plants to all these invasive species, which nothing can eat.
I have a friend who's involved with beekeeping, and she mentioned about the milkweed.
Yeah.
So.
No, I really want to thank you sincerely, Susan. Also, I want to thank Margaret, if she's still on this call, Margaret made this happen. Margaret Sloman, one of our committee members, really made this happen and made the connection, and I'm really grateful for that. I think this was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I hope that we can host you again for some other presentations. And we'll be in touch. And I'm really excited about this. And I hope the CAC is going to continue this and be able to provide these sort of presentations to the town. And I thank you really, Susan, for being our inaugural run on this. It was really fantastic.
Well,
And
thank you all for being my inaugural audience.
no, thank you so much. This was really fantastic. So
Yeah, great job,
really
Susan.
super appreciative. So I say good night from the CAC. Thank you so much for joining us.